In Rome's shadowed halls, Alexander VI's feast unveils a twisted world of power, sin, and unrelenting corruption. The flicker of candlelight dances across frescoed walls, illuminating a world where faith and ambition collide in shadowed corridors of power. You find yourself in late 15th century Italy, a land bursting with breathtaking art, soaring cathedrals, and brutal political intrigue. It is the Renaissance, an age when beauty masks decay and human frailty is veiled by the glitter of wealth and influence. Amid this volatile tapestry stands a man both reviled and revered, Rodrigo Borgia. Known to history as Pope Alexander VI, his name evokes scandal, cruelty, and cunning. But before he donned the papal tiara, Rodrigo was a master of ruthless politics, navigating the fierce rivalries of Italian city-states like Rome, Florence, and Venice, each vying for dominance. The Catholic Church itself, once a beacon of spiritual authority, was rotting from within. Its moral compass twisted by greed and corruption, the institution's waning influence was palpable. Cardinals and princes alike wielded faith as a weapon and wealth as a shield, fueling a relentless pursuit of power at any cost. Rodrigo's ascent to the papacy was not a divine calling, but a calculated coup, a masterstroke of political maneuvering. Despite a notorious reputation marred by allegations of simony, nepotism, and scandal, he seized the highest office in Christendom. His election shocked many, revealing the Church's fragility and the dark undercurrents beneath its sanctified surface. In this world, power was survival, and cruelty a tool wielded without hesitation. Rodrigo embodied these ruthless truths, his reign marked by forbidden secrets, brutal alliances, and a ceaseless hunger for dominance. Yet beneath this veneer of corruption lies a complex portrait of human frailty. The story of Alexander VI is not me. Rely one of villainy, but a haunting reflection on the cost of ambition, the shadows lurking behind sacred masks, and the fragile line between salvation and damnation. As you immerse yourself in this turbulent era, prepare to uncover a tale where beauty and brutality entwine, where faith is both a weapon and a prison, and where one man's thirst for power reshaped the course of history. If this journey into darkness and decadence intrigues you, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts below. What does power mean when wielded without conscience, and how does history judge those who dare to bend it to their will? Our next chapter will delve deeper into Rodrigo's early life, the forging of a man destined to become one of history's most infamous popes. The sun sets over Valencia's terracotta rooftops, casting long shadows over a city alive with ambition and whispered schemes. You step back into the late 15th century, to a world where family lineage and influence are currency more valuable than gold. Rodrigo Borgia was born into this charged atmosphere, his bloodline a powerful engine of aspiration and cunning. The Borgias were not merely nobility, they were architects of power, relentlessly hungry for more. From his earliest days, Rodrigo was shaped by this insatiable drive. Raised amid the sun-drenched palaces and bustling streets of Valencia, his childhood was marked not by innocence, but by lessons in survival. His family's influence opened doors, but the corridors of power were treacherous, each step shadowed by rivalries, betrayals, and alliances formed in smoke-filled chambers. By the time Rodrigo was a young man, his ecclesiastical career was already underway, a trajectory as much political as spiritual. The church offered a path not only to salvation, but to unimaginable power. Here, Rodrigo's talents flourished, his intellect sharp, his charm disarming, his ambition boundless. Yet even early on, the seeds of scandal took root. Tales of debauchery and excess swirled around him, whispered in both reverence and revulsion. His penchant for nepotism was notorious, placing relatives in key positions to consolidate the family's grip on power. His political maneuvers were ruthless, sometimes bordering on merciless, revealing a man unafraid to wield cruelty as a tool. You can almost see the contrast in him, the polished veneer of a charismatic cleric masking a calculating mind driven by an unyielding thirst for survival and dominance. Psychological insight reveals a complex figure caught between the demands of faith and the allure of earthly power, struggling with the tensions of morality and ambition. Rodrigo's early life is a crucible that forged the pope he would become, flawed, formidable, and feared. His rise was no accident, but a deliberate, strategic ascent fueled by cunning and unrelenting will. As you absorb this portrait, consider, what drives a man to sacrifice conscience for power? How much does ambition blind, and how deeply does it scar the soul? If this exploration of Rodrigo's origins captivates you, subscribe and share your thoughts below. What do you think shapes a leader's legacy, their deeds, their desires, or the shadows they leave behind? Next, we will journey deeper into his rise to the papacy, where power's price is revealed in full. The sharp clang of a distant bell tolls through the damp Venetian air, echoing like a death knell across narrow, winding alleys soaked in shadow. You enter a world where beauty and brutality collide, a world where Renaissance Italy's dazzling art and grand palaces conceal a savage undercurrent of violence, betrayal, and ruthless ambition. This is no mere backdrop. It is the crucible that hardens Rodrigo Borgia's heart and sets him on a path that will stain history with both grandeur and infamy. The reality of Italian politics in the late 15th century is brutal and unrelenting. Assassinations are as common as whispered secrets in candlelit chambers. Betrayals ripple through noble families like poison through veins. The threat of sudden, violent death hangs like a spectre over every gathering, every council, every feast. For Rodrigo, this world is not a distant theatre of intrigue. It is personal. He is no stranger to loss and humiliation. The deaths of allies, the betrayals by supposed friends, the public slights, each one cuts deep, sharpening his resolve and darkening the shadows that gather within his soul. You begin to glimpse the man behind the legend, a man shaped by grief and fear, driven by the instinct to survive at all costs. His personal tragedies fuel a relentless ambition, hardening his will and setting the stage for a ruthless transformation. Amid this turbulence emerge his infamous children, Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. Their names are etched into history, intertwined with scandal, political machinations, and tragedy. Cesare, a warrior prince whose charisma masks a terrifying ruthlessness. Lucrezia, a woman both celebrated for her beauty and haunted by the ruthless intrigues that shaped her life. These children are not merely offspring, they are extensions of Rodrigo's own complex legacy, symbols of power wielded with both grace and cruelty, caught in the relentless currents of ambition and survival. The papal court itself becomes a stage where moral decay festers behind gilded facades. The glittering ceremonies, sumptuous banquets, and majestic cathedrals cloak a world rife with corruption, secret alliances, and dark deeds. Power is the ultimate currency, and the price is often paid in blood. Psychologically, Rodrigo's journey is a descent, from an ambitious cardinal navigating treacherous waters to a notorious pope whose name invokes both awe and dread. His transformation reveals the corrosive effect of power on the human soul, how the pursuit of supremacy can erode conscience, warp morality, and blur the lines between victim and villain. Imagine the tension in his eyes during those dark nights, the conflicted emotions flickering behind his calculated gaze. Fear, ambition, grief, and a cold calculation converge, creating a complex portrait of a man trapped between hope and horror, power and helplessness. As you absorb this chapter of his life, consider the paradox of a man who wielded immense power yet was ensnared by the same ruthless forces he sought to command. How do loss and trauma shape the paths we choose? And at what cost do we chase the illusion of control? If this glimpse into Rodrigo's dark transformation grips you, please subscribe and leave your thoughts below. What do you believe drives a person to sacrifice humanity for power? Can ambition justify cruelty, or is it a tragic downfall waiting to happen? Next, we will explore Rodrigo's consolidation of power, the ruthless strategies and secret alliances that propelled him to the very pinnacle of the church, forever changing the course of history. Beneath the towering, frescoed ceilings of the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo's angels watch silently from above, whispered promises of gold and power mingled with prayers. It was here that the stage was set for a transformation darker than any faith could foresee. You find yourself in the year 1492, a time when Renaissance Italy shimmers with dazzling artistic brilliance, yet festers with corruption and decay. Candlelight flickers against marble pillars, and the heavy scent of burning incense hangs thick in the air, masking secrets far more sinister than the prayers uttered within these sacred walls. Rodrigo Borgia, a man of cunning and ambition, stands poised on the threshold of ultimate power. No longer just a cardinal navigating the treacherous currents of church politics, he is now about to become Pope Alexander VI, the sovereign ruler of Christ. These feasts were a theatrical blend of political machinations and symbolic cruelty. Nobles and clergy alike gathered in opulent halls, their laughter and whispered plots weaving an intricate web of alliance and betrayal. Here, amid the clinking of goblets filled with the finest wines, poison was slipped silently into cups. Alliances forged with honeyed words masked knives poised to strike. Sensory images flood your mind, the soft moan of pleasure echoing from shadowed alcoves, where indulgence turned into excess. The cruel snap of betrayal as promises were broken and lives extinguished. Velvet and gold concealed horrors beneath their rich folds. These orgies and manipulations were the lifeblood of a court that thrived on power and feared weakness. But behind this intoxicating display of charm and opulence, a far darker reality simmered beneath the surface. Rodrigo's outward confidence concealed a mind gripped by paranoia. The hunger for control gnawed relentlessly at him. Enemies lurked in every corner, spies whispered in the shadows, and trust became a rare commodity. The line between friend and foe blurred until it vanished entirely. You see a man torn between his grand public persona and the private terror that stalks him in sleepless nights. His charisma, once a weapon, now serves as a mask, hiding a psyche fraying at the edges. Grandiosity wars with insecurity. The Pope's soul, consumed by ambition, begins to fracture under the immense weight of power. As the master puppeteer of the Vatican, Rodrigo's court becomes a kingdom of shadows and light, splendid and terrifying in equal measure. The transformation is complete. The ambitious cardinal is no more. In his place stands a figure both legend and nightmare, casting a shadow that will stretch long beyond the Renaissance. Reflect on this ascent, on what it reveals about the cost of absolute power. How much of one's soul can be bartered away in the quest for dominion? When does the pursuit of immortality through influence become the slow death of the self? If this intoxicating rise to power grips you as it does me, I encourage you to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think compels a man to sacrifice everything, even his humanity, for the crown of thorns and gold? Next, we will delve into the tangled relationships and ruthless politics that defined Pope Alexander VI's reign, the alliances and betrayals that shaped his legacy, and the human cost hidden behind the papal splendor. The Vatican, an ornate prison cloaked in marble and gold, echoed with whispers of fear and loyalty enforced through cold cruelty. You step inside this gilded cage, the very heart of Renaissance power and decadence. The walls shimmer with art that speaks of divine grace, yet beneath this dazzling surface a darker reality festers, a realm ruled not by faith but by fear, intrigue, and ruthless manipulation. This is the court of Alexander VI, a world where appearances deceive and cruelty is the unspoken law. Imagine the courtiers, the servants, the hapless victims caught in the tangled web woven by the Pope's insatiable ambition. They move like shadows beneath frescoed ceilings, their lives dictated by the whims of a man whose charm masks a terrifying hunger for control. Every smile, every nod is calculated. Trust is a currency rarer than gold, and betrayal lurks behind every gilded doorway. Within these walls, art and architecture are not mere decoration but tools of power. The grand halls, adorned with frescoes depicting saints and angels, serve as a breathtaking facade to conceal rot and corruption. The exquisite marble columns, the intricate tapestries, the majestic altars, all speak of glory, yet hide the decay beneath. This spectacle of magnificence is designed to awe and intimidate, to project invincibility while masking fractures that threaten to shatter the very foundation. The moral corruption here is pervasive, seeping through every crack and crevice. Political survival demands a merciless hand, and personal debauchery thrives unchecked. The Pope's infamous banquets are legendary for their excess, a brutal theatre where allies are courted with poison-tipped smiles and enemies are dispatched in silence. Lust, greed, and violence mingle freely beneath the velvet drapes, blurring the line between sacred ritual and profane indulgence. Psychologically, this oppressive system exacts a heavy toll. Alexander VI, for all his outward confidence and grandiosity, is haunted by paranoia and isolation. The constant threat of betrayal gnaws at him, fueling a cycle of suspicion that poisons his mind. Those around him bear the weight of this suffocating atmosphere. The courtier's smiles hide anxiety, the servant's footsteps echo with dread, and victims tremble beneath the unyielding gaze of a man who tolerates no dissent. You sense the contrast starkly. The Pope's eternal outward beauty and commanding presence, preserved by cunning and dark rituals, stands in grim opposition to the internal decay, the moral and psychological rot that eats away at his soul. This is a man trapped by his own ambition, ensnared in a system that consumes all who enter it. As you walk these halls, you realize that the true horror lies not just in acts of cruelty, but in the suffocating atmosphere of control and fear, the invisible chains binding every life within the Vatican's walls. It is a kingdom of shadows, where power is both a weapon and a prison. Consider this haunting paradox. In the quest for absolute dominion, Alexander VI crafted a realm that ensured his survival but eroded the very humanity he sought to preserve. How do those who live under such tyranny find moments of hope, or do they simply surrender to the relentless darkness? If this grim tableau captures your imagination, take a moment to like and comment below. What would you do if trapped in a world where beauty masks brutality and loyalty demands silence? In the next section, we will confront the fierce conflicts and inner demons that tore at the Pope's fragile hold on power, revealing the psychological battle beneath the surface. In the shadowed halls of power, where whispers can topple kings and loyalty is a fragile mask, Alexander's reign teeters on a knife's edge. You find yourself at the heart of a storm, a tempest fueled by enemies both seen and unseen. The year is the late 1490s, and Pope Alexander VI's dominion over Rome is besieged not just by external foes, but by the corrosive fractures within his own circle. The Renaissance, famed for its artistic brilliance, hides beneath its dazzling veneer a world roiling with political chaos and deadly intrigue. Here, power is never secure. It demands sacrifice, cunning, and cruelty. Opposition swells like a gathering tide. Reformers within the church denounce Alexander's corruption with fiery sermons, preaching of renewal while plotting his downfall. The air crackles with tension as once loyal cardinals now eye the papal throne with greedy ambition. Rival families, the jealous Medici and the ambitious Orsini, maneuver their pawns on the chessboard of Italian politics, each seeking to diminish the Borgia's grip. Assassinations shad every dark alley, poison lurks in every goblet, and betrayal waits patiently beneath every handshake. At the center of this maelstrom stands the Borgia family, their infamy spreading like wildfire through Europe's courts and taverns. Cesare Borgia, Rodrigo's ruthless son, is a figure both admired and feared, a brilliant general whose campaigns are marked by brutality and cunning. His conquests extend the family's influence but leave a trail of devastation, igniting rumors of cruelty that border on the supernatural. His presence is a weapon, a reminder that the Pope's power is enforced with blood and steel. Then there is Lucrezia Borgia, whose name is whispered in both reverence and revulsion. She moves like a shadowed enigma, her role in the family's intrigues cloaked in mystery. Some see her as a pawn used to forge alliances through marriage. Others suspect a darker hand behind whispered scandals. Her beauty is famed, yet it is her secrets, the whispered accusations of poisonings and betrayals that haunt the corridors of power. Alexander's world shrinks as paranoia tightens its grip. Every smile feels like a dagger poised to strike. Every ally may conceal a traitor's heart. The Pope's eyes, once bright with ambition, now flicker with suspicion and fear. Dreams of absolute dominion are tainted by sleepless nights filled with shadowy threats and imagined conspiracies. His mind becomes a battlefield, torn between the calculated coldness of a ruler and the fragile remnants of a man. Yet within this crucible of power and fear, moments of vulnerability pierce the armor. In rare solitude, Alexander confronts the ghosts of his choices, the faces of those sacrificed for ambition, the price paid in blood and broken trust. Here, ambition clashes with a fleeting conscience, a whisper of doubt that gnaws at his soul. But such moments are brief, swallowed by the relentless demands of survival in a world that brooks no weakness. This internal conflict reveals a psychological portrait of a man unraveling. Identity fractures under the weight of power, trauma accumulates in silent corners of the mind. Alexander is not merely a tyrant, but a human caught in the vice of his own making, tormented by the very cruelty he commands. His story is a study in the duality of strength and fragility, a tragic figure ensnared in a game where every victory exacts a deeper toll. As you immerse yourself in this era of treachery and turmoil, consider the precarious balance between control and chaos. How much of one's humanity can survive when surrounded by ceaseless betrayal? Can ambition coexist with conscience, or does the quest for power inevitably consume the soul? If these dark truths captivate you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your thoughts. How do you reconcile the complex legacy of a man who embodies both genius and monstrosity? Next, we will delve deeper into the moments where Alexander's grip falters and the seeds of his ultimate downfall begin to take root. In the midst of shadows cast by ambition and betrayal, rare flickers of light struggle to break through the darkness. You stand now on the cusp of a moment where a man, feared and reviled, attempts to wrest control from the chaos he helped unleash. Pope Alexander VI, a figure synonymous with corruption and excess, reveals in rare instances a desperate longing to legitimize his reign, to restore a semblance of order amid the swirling madness. Picture Rome in the late 1490s, a city of contradictions where the grandeur of Renaissance art blooms amid political rot. Within the marble halls of the Vatican, Alexander seeks to reshape his image, not just as a power-hungry despot, but as a patron of culture and a guardian of faith. His hand funds the strokes of Michelangelo, the designs of Bramante, while diplomacy weaves its fragile threads among the fractious city-states. These acts are not mere vanity. They are calculated moves to stitch together legitimacy in a reign teetering on the edge. Yet beneath the surface, a tempest brews. You can almost hear the clash of steel in darkened alleys, the whispered accusations echoing through Rome's narrow streets. The Pope's attempts at reform, clumsy and half-hearted, are swallowed by the weight of his excesses. The lavish banquets, the rumoured poisonings, the scandalous affairs that stain the papal court, each a bitter reminder that the moral cost of his ambitions is mounting beyond concealment. Imagine Alexander alone in his chambers, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on the frescoed walls. In these moments, away from the prying eyes of courtiers and cardinals, doubt gnaws at him. Regret seeps through the cracks of his hardened exterior. But these feelings are fleeting, smothered by the relentless need to hold on to power. The Pope knows well that any sign of weakness invites destruction. Historical records hint at these internal battles. Letters from contemporaries describe a man torn between his desire for salvation and the habits that condemn him. Confidants recount whispered prayers and secret meetings with spiritual advisors, desperate attempts to find redemption. Yet, these are consistently overshadowed by the ruthlessness with which he suppresses dissent and consolidates his influence. Throughout this volatile period, alliances are forged and shattered like fragile glass. A marriage arranged to secure political ties falls apart amid betrayals and shifting loyalties. Trusted advisors turn traitor, drawn away by promises or threats. Public scandals erupt with increasing frequency, each one a blow to the Pope's already fragile reputation. The city murmurs with growing unrest. The papal court becomes a powder keg ready to ignite. The tension is palpable, like a taut string ready to snap. Can Alexander's reign withstand the gathering storm? Will his attempts at reform and patronage suffice to mask the rot beneath the gilded surface, or will the very forces he unleashed consume him in a tragic downfall? Psychologically, this era is a crucible of conflict. The Pope's identity fractures further as the man behind the mitre battles with the monstrous legacy he has created. The strain of maintaining control eats away at his soul, deepening paranoia and isolation. His rare moments of humanity are drowned out by the roar of ambition and fear. As you journey through this chapter of Alexander's life, reflect on the fragility of power built on treachery. How does one reconcile a desire for redemption with the need to dominate? At what point does resistance become surrender and survival a self-inflicted prison? If this glimpse into the complexities of power intrigues you, please like and subscribe. Your comments help us explore these dark histories with the respect and depth they deserve. Next, we will explore the dramatic climax of Alexander VI's reign, where fate and fortune collide in a reckoning that will echo through history. In the twilight of a reign built on shadows, the gilded halls of power begin to crumble, while outside the storm gathers. You find yourself in Rome, 1503. The city breathes uneasily under the weight of a pope whose legacy is stained by greed, betrayal, and whispered terrors. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, once the untouchable sovereign of Christendom, now faces the inexorable decay not only of his health but of his dominion. Imagine the opulent Vatican chambers, where once grand feasts, spilled wine like blood and laughter danced with menace beneath crystal chandeliers. Tonight, the echoes feel hollow, the air heavy with unspoken dread. The final feast unfolds, a macabre pageant of excess and foreboding. Silver platters gleam under flickering candlelight, carrying delicacies whose sumptuousness only deepens the darkness. Yet, amid the revelry, attention coils like a serpent. Whispers of poison and divine reckoning thread through the courtiers' wary glances. Historical testimonies paint this scene with vivid brushstrokes. Chroniclers recount how Alexander's body, once robust and commanding, now trembled with frailty. His breath grew shallow, his skin, once flushed with the vigor of power, now pallid and clammy. The Pope's final days were marked by a haunting juxtaposition, the outward spectacle of indulgence masking an inward spiral of fear and despair. You sense the psychological torment beneath the surface. A man who clawed his way to the pinnacle of earthly power, who shaped alliances and crushed enemies with ruthless cunning, now confronted the ultimate reckoning. Mortality. His ambition, that relentless fire, could not stave off the silence that awaited. What ghosts haunted his last hours? Was it the faces of those betrayed, the shadows of sons and daughters ensnared in scandal, or the weight of a conscience long buried beneath gold and sin? Rumours swirled, poisoning perhaps the final act of an enemy's vengeance or divine punishment for sins too grievous to ignore. Some whispered that the church itself had turned its gaze, judgment swift and merciless. The truth, as often in history, remains shrouded, lost amid the swirl of intrigue and myth. The symbolic darkness of Alexander's final moments holds a stark lesson. The hunger for absolute power is a double-edged sword. It grants dominion, yet demands a devastating price. In his death, the Pope's empire began to fracture, his son's violent ambitions igniting new conflicts that would forever scar the Italian peninsula. As you reflect on this climax, consider the fragile line between greatness and ruin. How does the pursuit of power reshape a soul? When does survival become self-destruction? Alexander VI's life offers a haunting mirror, one that reflects the darkest potentials of human desire. If you find yourself drawn to these tales of power and downfall, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What do you believe lies beyond the legends, the man or the myth? Next, we will delve into the enduring legacy of Alexander VI, how history remembers him and the lessons his life imparts to us all. The name Borgia, whispered in corridors of power and shadowed alleyways, still reverberates through history, a dark echo of corruption, cunning, and cruelty. You stand centuries removed from the opulence and intrigue of Renaissance Rome, yet the legacy of Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, clings stubbornly to the present. It's a legacy tangled in both fascination and revulsion, one that shaped not only the church but the very fabric of European history. Imagine the echoes of his papacy, a time when the sacred and the profane collided with dizzying intensity. The Borgia name became synonymous with decadence and political ruthlessness, a brand etched into the popular imagination through tales of poison, betrayal, and the infamous dark feasts that symbolized an era's moral collapse. These stories, passed down through generations, often blur the line between fact and legend, yet they reveal something profoundly human: the allure and peril of unchecked power. Historians continue to debate the true nature of Alexander VI. Was he merely a villain, a Machiavellian architect of sin, or a man shaped by the brutal demands of survival in a fractured world? Some suggest he was a product of his times, an embodiment of the ruthless pragmatism required to navigate a church and society riddled with corruption. Others argue that his moral failures accelerated the church's inevitable reckoning. Indeed, his reign fanned the flames that would soon erupt into the Protestant Reformation. The rampant nepotism, simony, and moral decay under his papacy laid bare the deep rot within the Catholic Church, galvanizing reformers who sought to restore spiritual integrity. Martin Luther's 95 Theses and the subsequent upheavals were in many ways a response to the excesses epitomized by Alexander VI's Vatican. But beyond the grand sweep of history, the Borgia legacy permeated art, politics, and culture. The papal court's lavish patronage of artists like Pinturicchio and the embellishment of Rome's architecture are paradoxical testaments to a ruler who sought to mask decadence with beauty. These masterpieces still adorn churches and palaces, standing as silent witnesses to a time when art was both a tool of propaganda and a refuge from the shadows. You must consider the psychological depth behind this legacy. Alexander VI's relentless pursuit of power, his manipulation of kin and courtiers, reveal a man caught between ambition and fear, control and chaos. His story exposes the fragile boundaries where leadership descends into tyranny, where survival instincts transform into a corrosive obsession. Reflect on how the image of the Dark Feast, a gathering where indulgence and cruelty entwined, has transcended history to become a symbol of human frailty. It reminds us that beneath the veneer of civility lies the capacity for darkness, and that power, when wielded without conscience, distorts not only societies but the souls of those who command it. If this exploration into the shadows of history captivates you, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. How do you interpret the legacy of figures like Alexander VI? Monsters, products of their era, or something more complex? As we prepare to close this journey, the final chapter awaits, a haunting reflection on vanity, mortality, and the shadows we all carry within. In the silent shadows of history's grandest halls, the echoes of power's corrupting touch still linger, whispers of excess, cruelty, and the human cost of ambition. You find yourself walking through the vast, empty corridors of the Vatican, a place once pulsing with life, laughter, and sinister plots. The marble beneath your feet gleams cold, reflecting flickers of ghostly candlelight. Here, centuries ago, the infamous Dark Feasts unfolded, spectacles of opulence so extreme they blurred the lines between celebration and sacrilege. These gatherings were not mere indulgence. They were stark metaphors for humanity's insatiable appetite for power and excess, often devouring integrity and compassion in their wake. Consider this. The rise and fall of Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, is not just a story of one man's moral decay. It is a haunting mirror reflecting a timeless human struggle. Power, when severed from conscience and empathy, becomes a voracious force. It consumes, twists, and ultimately isolates. The Pope's reign was a vivid tableau of this truth. His lavish feasts and ruthless politics were outward expressions of an inner fracture, a soul at war with itself. The Dark Feast embodies this paradox. Imagine a grand hall drenched in golden light, tables groaning under the weight of sumptuous delicacies and overflowing goblets. Yet beneath the veneer of glamour lies cruelty, poisoned chalices, whispered betrayals, and lives extinguished like candles flickering in the draught. The feast is a metaphor for excess, where the hunger for power and pleasure tramples upon justice and humanity. This spectacle, equal parts allure and horror, resonates far beyond Renaissance Rome. It is a cautionary tale about the seductive nature of unchecked ambition. Alexander VI's story warns us that the pursuit of immortality, dominion, or fame can lead to a death far worse than physical demise. The erosion of the self, the decay of morality, and the isolation born from fear and suspicion. Psychologically, the Pope's trajectory reveals how power can fracture identity. Behind the crown and charismatic facade was a man haunted by paranoia, driven by a desperate desire to control a world slipping from his grasp. His paranoia intensified, friendships soured, and trust became a dangerous currency. This personal disintegration echoes a universal truth. Power's heaviest price is often paid within, yet the legacy of Alexander VI is more than a historical judgment. It is a haunting enigma, a blend of fact and myth, history and legend. The shadows that linger over the Vatican's empty halls remind us of forgotten souls, victims of ambition and cruelty, whose stories dissolve in time's mist. They whisper warnings to us across centuries, urging reflection on the nature of power and the human condition. As the sun sets behind the ancient domes, casting long shadows over Rome's cobblestone streets, you can almost hear the faint echoes of laughter, cries, and whispered secrets, the remnants of a world where survival often meant sacrifice, and morality was a battlefield. You are left to wonder, how does power shape us? How do cruelty and survival intertwine in the story of humanity? And perhaps most chillingly, how far would you go to escape the inevitability of decay and death? If you've been drawn into this dark history, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts below. How do you see the balance between ambition and conscience playing out in today's world? As we close this chapter, remember, history is not merely a chronicle of the past, but a mirror to ourselves, a reflection of the shadows we carry within.